Gloria Mae Carter had 3 grown daughters, but when she suffered a stroke in her own kitchen, none of them was the one who called 911. The person who saved her was a 12-year-old boy who lived across the street. And the most heartbreaking part was that would not be the last time Isaiah had to save her from her own family's neglect. That evening, Gloria Mae Carter's small house in Decatur was so quiet that you could hear the refrigerator humming steadily in the kitchen. She had lived there for more than 30 years, surrounded by old photographs of her late husband, cards from students, back when she worked in an elementary school cafeteria, and 3 framed pictures of her 3 daughters sitting on the living room shelf. Gloria was making a cup of peppermint tea like she did every night, her left hand holding the edge of the table, her right hand reaching for the pale blue mug that Isaiah the boy across the street had once called her lucky mug. But just as the hot water touched the rim of the cup, her hand suddenly began to tremble. The cup fell to the floor and shattered into pieces. Gloria opened her mouth to call Angela, then Monique, then Denise, but the only sound that came out was a distorted choking noise. One side of her face drooped, her knees buckled, her shoulder struck the edge of the kitchen cabinet, and in the last moment before she lost consciousness, she saw the light across the street. 12-year-old Isaiah Brooks was doing his math homework by his bedroom window when he saw the curtain in Mrs. Gloria's kitchen pulled crooked, the light flickering as if someone had bumped into the switch. He jumped to his feet. The memory of his father collapsing in the living room years ago came rushing back cold and sharp. Isaiah did not panic and run across the street. He picked up the phone, dialed 911, and said in a trembling but clear voice that his neighbor might be having a stroke. When Gloria Mae Carter woke up, the first thing she heard was not her daughters calling her mama, but the steady beeping of the heart monitor beside her hospital bed. The white hospital lights made everything feel colder, from the thin blanket pulled across her chest to the 3 familiar faces standing near the door. Angela Carter Wells. Her oldest daughter was still wearing a cream-colored business suit, holding her phone, as if one more call would make everything in her life late. Monique stood behind her, her eyes red but her hands kept twisting around her new wedding ring. Denise, the youngest, had her arms crossed over her chest, her face both worried and irritated as if her mother's pain had arrived on a terribly inconvenient day. The doctor said Gloria was out of danger, but she would need someone to monitor her medication, help her eat, help her walk, help her speak. And above all, she could not be left alone during the first few weeks. The room fell silent. Angela was the first to speak, her voice low but sharp. She said she had a real estate deal she could not miss. Monique said her new husband was not used to having a sick person in the house. Denise sighed and said if she closed her hair salon for a few days, she would lose clients. Gloria lay there, one side of her face still weak, her throat raw and aching, but every word from her daughters still fell into her heart as clearly as needles. Then Angela mentioned a cheap nursing home out in the suburbs, calling it a temporary solution. Just then, Isaiah Brooks stepped inside, small in his gray hoodie, holding a handmade card in both hands that said, "Get well soon, Miss Gloria." Gloria tried to lift her left hand to touch the card, and for the first time since waking up, tears fell from her eyes. When the boy left the room, Angela watched him go, frowned and whispered, "Why is that boy always around our mother?" 3 days later, Gloria Mae Carter was brought home in a hospital wheelchair with a bag of medication resting in her lap and tired eyes looking through the car window. The small house in Decatur still stood there familiar and peaceful. But when the door opened, Gloria suddenly felt that everything was wider, colder, as if the place that had held her for more than 30 years had now become a room too large for a woman who could no longer stand steadily on her own. Angela placed the pill organizer on the kitchen table. Monique arranged a few frozen meals in the freezer, and Denise quickly checked the living room before sighing as if she had just finished an unpleasant chore. Before leaving, Angela bent down and said they would stop by tomorrow, her voice softer than usual, but her eyes already drifting toward her phone. Gloria tried to nod, tried to believe those words, because sometimes an old mother still chooses to believe her children, even when her heart already knows the answer. But tomorrow, no one came. Morning passed, then afternoon faded. The newspaper lay on the front porch, the trash bin still stood by the curb, and in the kitchen, Gloria dropped a glass of water while trying to reach for it with her weak hand. By the second day, Isaiah came home from school and saw that everything was still exactly the same. He knocked for a long time, then ran home to call his mother. Renee Brooks opened the door with the spare key Gloria had once given her in case there was a storm, and they found Gloria sitting silently in a chair, her lips dry, the medication still untouched in the organizer. When Renee called Angela, the oldest daughter's voice was so cold the kitchen itself seemed to go still. She has 3 daughters. She doesn't need the whole neighborhood in her business. That night, Isaiah tied a small bell beside Mrs. Gloria's kitchen window, so if no one else could hear her calling, at least he still could. That afternoon, Gloria Mae Carter heard a car pull up in front of the house, and her heart brightened slightly, like a room whose curtains had just been opened. Her 3 daughters walked in almost at the same time, bringing with them the smell of perfume, the sound of heels, and the busy air of people who had only stopped by because they had something to do. Angela placed her handbag on the kitchen table and pulled out a thick stack of neatly clipped papers, while Monique stood beside the window avoiding her mother's eyes. Denise opened the refrigerator, saw the frozen meals that had not been touched, but instead of asking what Gloria had eaten, she only let out a heavy sigh. Angela said the house had gone up greatly in value, that investors were watching the neighborhood, and that if they sold it now, the money could be used to pay for Gloria's care in a place that was more appropriate. Gloria looked at the stack of papers on the table, looked at the words financial power of attorney, then looked over at the home sale agreement, and in that moment she understood that her daughters had not come to bring her back to her old life. They had come to take away the last thing that still made her feel like herself. Gloria tried to say no, but the sound came out distorted and weak. Angela picked up the pen, placed it into her mother's trembling hand, her voice softening as if she were coaxing a child. "Mama, don't make this harder than it has to be." Denise stood beside her, saying almost the same thing, while Monique lowered her head in silence. Just as the tip of the pen touched the paper, there was a knock at the door. Isaiah Brooks stood on the porch holding a container of soup his mother had made with both hands. Angela opened the door and coldly told him to go home and not interfere in another family's business. Isaiah quietly turned away, but before he stepped down from the porch, he heard Angela say in the kitchen, "If she won't sign now, we'll have to take her somewhere she can't keep refusing." That night, Gloria tried to stand up and reach for the phone to call Renee, but her legs gave out. Her whole body fell hard beside the kitchen table, and outside the window the little bell began ringing over and over. Isaiah Brooks heard the small bell while he was washing dishes after dinner. The sound was not loud, just urgent little jingles mixed with the wind on the porch, but to him it sounded like someone trying to call from a very far-away place. Isaiah ran to the door, looked across at Mrs. Gloria's dark house, then rushed across the street before his mother could ask anything. He pounded on the front door, calling her name through the crack, but inside there was only silence and the yellow kitchen light spilling onto the floor. The door was locked. Isaiah did not try to break it down. He stepped back, his hand trembling as he dialed 911 for the second time in less than a week. His voice choked, but every word clear. "Please hurry. Miss Gloria fell. I think she's hurt." When the ambulance arrived, Renee ran over too, wrapping an arm around her son's shoulders as the paramedics opened the door and found Gloria lying on her side beside the kitchen table, one hand still trying to reach for the phone that had fallen under the chair. This time at the hospital, the air was no longer just filled with worry. It was heavier, colder, as if there was a question no one wanted to say out loud. Carmen Ellis, the social worker, stood beside the hospital bed and asked each question very slowly, who gave Gloria her medication, who prepared her meals, who checked on her every day. The three daughters arrived nearly an hour late, and Angela immediately said Renee and Isaiah had gotten far too involved in family matters. Isaiah did not argue. He simply opened his school notebook where he had written down each day the newspaper left on the porch. The medication untouched, the lights not turned off. The door, no one opened. Carmen looked at the notebook for a long time. At the hospital bed, Angela stepped forward to take her mother's hand, but Gloria slowly pulled her hand away. Carmen leaned down, her voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Carter, do you feel safe going home with your daughters in charge?" Gloria closed her eyes, tears rolling down, and then she shook her head. Room 214 of the Rehabilitation Center had a window looking out at an old oak tree where the afternoon sunlight fell across the floor in soft golden strips like a blanket. Gloria Mae Carter was moved there with one hand still weak, her voice still broken in her throat, and a quiet fear that she might never again become the woman who used to cook her own dinner, open her own front door, and call her daughters' names in a clear voice. But every day after school, Isaiah Brooks appeared at the doorway with his backpack on his shoulder and a local newspaper folded in half. He sat beside her bed, reading her small pieces of neighborhood news, from the high school basketball game to the new bakery that had opened near the church, then patiently helped her practice one word at a time. Water. Gloria repeated it, the sound distorted. Home. She tried again, her lips trembling. No. That word brought tears to her eyes. And then, one afternoon, after nearly 10 minutes of silence, she looked at the boy in front of her and managed to say his name. Isaiah. He lowered his head, smiling with red, watery eyes. That day, Isaiah told her that his father had also suffered a stroke, but no one had recognized the sign soon enough, and from that day on he had always watched closely whenever an adult suddenly changed the way they walked, the way they spoke, or the way they stood. Gloria understood that he was not only saving her, he was also trying to save the most painful memory inside himself. When the center held a family caregiving training session, all three daughters were invited, but none of them came. The person sitting there learning how to help Gloria stand, divide her medication, and prepare soft foods was Renee Isaiah's mother. Carmen looked at the empty list beside the names of Gloria's three daughters, then said softly, "Sometimes the person who shows up says more than the person who shares your last name." That morning in room 214, Gloria Mae Carter sat straighter than usual, both hands resting on the thin blanket across her knees. Outside the window, the old oak tree trembled lightly in the wind, and Isaiah sat beside her, patiently waiting for her to repeat her speech exercises like she did every day. But this time, Gloria no longer spoke in separate words. She looked at Carmen, looked at Renee, then looked toward the door as if beyond it was the entire life she had almost lost. Her voice was hoarse, slow, and not yet fully formed, but every sound landed in the room with heartbreaking clarity. "I want to go home." Carmen did not smile right away. She understood that Gloria did not simply want to leave the rehabilitation center. She wanted to return home without being controlled anymore. That afternoon, Carmen introduced her to Patricia Whitfield, an attorney who specialized in protecting the elderly. Patricia sat beside the bed and explained that if Gloria was still mentally clear, no one had the right to force her to sign a power of attorney, sell her house, or decide where she had to live. Gloria held the pen in her still trembling hand and slowly wrote 2 words on a blank sheet of paper. No sale. After that, she asked Renee to be her temporary emergency contact, not because Renee was replacing her daughters, but because Renee was the one who had truly shown up. The news reached Angela very quickly. She dragged Monique and Denise to the center, stepped into the room with a stiff face, and said the woman across the street was turning their mother against her own family. This time, Gloria did not lower her eyes. She looked straight at Angela, her lips trembling but her voice clearer than ever. "You did that yourselves. On the day Gloria Mae Carter was brought home, she thought she would return quietly with only the soft grinding of wheelchair wheels on the walkway and the evening shadows falling over the old porch. But when the car stopped in front of the door, she saw the whole neighborhood waiting. Renee Brooks held a pot of hot soup. Mr. Lewis from the end of the street brought a toolbox to install an extra handrail beside the stairs. Mrs. Jenkins carried a blue wool blanket, and several children stood in a line in front of the porch, holding up a sign written in crayon, "Welcome home." Miss Gloria. Gloria placed her trembling hand over her chest, her eyes filling before she could say a word. Her 3 daughters were there too, but they stood in the back, confused like people who had just stepped into a story they had never known their mother had been living. When Renee helped Gloria into the chair beside the window, she gently told them that many years earlier, after Isaiah's father died from a stroke, Gloria had been the one who quietly paid for his school lunches for 6 months. Renee only learned about it much later, and what she never forgot was that during all that time Gloria had skipped her own lunch in the school cafeteria so she could use that little bit of money to pay for Isaiah's meals. Then one by one the neighbors stepped forward, one person telling how Gloria had once bought winter coats for their children, another telling how she had once left bags of food at their door when they were unemployed, another telling how she had once sat for hours teaching a child to read his first words. Gloria was not rich, had never been rich, but she had given in a way that only people who had once gone without could understand the value of a meal, a pair of shoes, a light still glowing on the porch. Isaiah stepped forward and placed an old box filled with thank you cards from former students in her lap. Angela looked at the box, looked at the people gathered around her mother, and in that moment she was silent. But then her phone buzzed. A real estate investor said Gloria's house could sell for more than expected. Angela glanced at the porch that had just been repaired, and the look in her eyes changed. Gloria Mae Carter's 69th birthday was held right on the porch of her small house with no fancy restaurant, no expensive flowers, only the paper lights. Isaiah had hung that morning, the cake Renee had baked, herself a few rows of folding chairs from the neighbors, and the sound of children laughing in the soft evening light. Gloria sat in the middle of the porch, her cane beside her silver hair neatly combed. Her eyes still tired but much brighter than the day she left the hospital. Her 3 daughters came too. Monique brought flowers. Denise held a small gift bag, and Angela showed up late, her lips pressed tight, her hand still holding her phone as if she were waiting for a call more important than her own mother. At first everyone thought it would be a day of reconciliation. But as soon as the birthday song ended, Angela leaned down and said quietly that their mother could not let outsiders decide the future of the house, that the people sitting on the porch were not family, and that Gloria should sign the papers before it was too late. The air suddenly froze. Gloria pushed her hands against the arms of the chair and slowly stood up with her cane. The whole porch went completely silent. She looked at Angela, then at Monique and Denise, her voice trembling, but every word clear. Family is not the person who waits for Mama to get weak so they can sell Mama's house. Family is the person who knocks on the door when they see something wrong with Mama's lights. Angela went pale. Monique burst into tears. Denise lowered her head. Just then, attorney Patricia Whitfield stepped onto the porch and announced that the house would not be sold. Later, it would become the Carter House Reading Room, a place where children in the neighborhood could come read after school along with a small scholarship fund named after Gloria's late husband. Denise knelt down in front of her mother and choked out that she had forgotten who her mother was. Gloria looked at her daughter for a long time, then answered softly, "No, you forgot who you were." 3 months later, Gloria Mae Carter's small house was no longer a place people passed by with worry in their hearts. Every Saturday afternoon, the porch light was turned on early. The small chairs were lined up neatly in the living room, and the sound of children spelling words filled the place where there had once been only the ticking of an old clock passing through lonely days. Gloria still walked slowly with her cane, and her voice was still hoarse on a few words, but when she sat in front of the children and opened a picture book, no one looked at her as a woman who had once been abandoned after a stroke. They looked at her as someone who had stood back up from the very place where she had fallen. Isaiah always sat in the front row, quiet, but proud, his eyes lighting up every time Gloria read a long sentence correctly without having to stop. Monique began stopping by every Sunday afternoon, not saying much, just quietly cooking a pot of soup and washing blankets for her mother. Denise closed her hair salon early on Thursdays to take Gloria to physical therapy, and every time she helped her mother step into the car, she did it slowly, as if she were learning how to become a daughter all over again. Angela took the longest to come back. She stood across the street for weeks, not daring to knock, until one afternoon she left an envelope in the mailbox with the canceled agreement with the investor inside, along with a handwritten line, "I'm sorry I saw the house before I saw my mother." Gloria read it for a long time. She did not forgive right away, like in a fairy tale, but that night she still opened the door. When Isaiah brought over his school essay, its title was "The Woman Who Taught Me That Showing Up Is Love." Gloria finished reading it, smiled, then turned the porch light brighter than every other night. The lesson of the story is not that blood always knows how to love, and not that care always comes from duty. Sometimes, real family is the person who sees your pain, crosses the dark street, and chooses to stay when everyone else has turned away.